"Sign it, Miss Ambry, or your father hangs before the frost breaks." The words fell into the freezing study like stones dropped into a well, and Tyrrell, Duke of Rushwick, watched the young woman across his desk go very still, not the stillness of fright, which he had expected, but the stillness of someone counting the true cost of a thing before she paid it. He had spoken cruelly on purpose. Cruelty was efficient. It shortened these interviews, spared him the pleading he despised, and let him return the sooner to the silence he had cultivated for 11 years, since the winter that had taught him what tenderness cost a man. He pushed the document an inch nearer to her gloved and mended fingers, and the single candle threw the shadow of his hand across the paper like a bar. "You mistake me, your grace," said Tyrian Ambry, and her voice did not shake. "My father owes a debt of £400. A debt is not a hanging matter. It is when the debt is owed to the crown and dressed up as a defalcation," Tyrrell answered. "Your father was steward to the late Lord Braithwell. Monies passed through his hands that cannot now be found. Whether he took them or merely failed to guard them is a question a magistrate will resolve in an afternoon, and magistrates, in my experience, prefer the tidy verdict to the true one. He will be tried for embezzlement. He will be convicted. And a man of 56 does not outlast the hulks. He let that sit, unless the note that his lordship's hair holds against him is bought up and burned. I hold it now. I bought it this morning." She looked at him then fully, and he found the directness of it faintly uncomfortable, as though a lamp had been turned toward his face without warning. She was not beautiful in the manner the drawing-rooms prized, no bloom of hothouse roses about her, no studied helplessness. Her gown was 3 seasons out of the mode and had been let down at the hem by a hand he guessed was her own. But there was a clean, unhurried intelligence in the set of her mouth, and her eyes, grey as a March sky, took his measure without flinching and without flattery, and he was not accustomed to being looked at so. "Then you have already saved him," she said. "You have only to keep the note in your pocket and do nothing. Why bring me here at midnight to sign my name to marriage?" Tyrrell rose and went to the window, because it was easier to say the thing to the black glass than to the grey eyes. Frost had begun to fern across the panes. Beyond, his park ran down to the river in a sheet of moonlit rime, 6,000 acres of it, and the great house of Rushwick at his back held 40 servants, and not one soul who loved him, which precisely how he had arranged matters and precisely how he intended them to remain. "Because I require a wife," he said, "and I have found it more troublesome to acquire one than a man in my position ought to find it. I am 38. I have no hair. My cousin Alden, a fool who has drunk one estate to the ground already and eyes mine like a starving man eyes bread, stands next in the succession, and I would sooner give Rushwick to the river than to him. Therefore I must marry, and I must get a son, and I must do both without the tedious pretence of sentiment that the marriage market demands. I have watched that market. Every mother in 3 counties has paraded a daughter before me. Each daughter has been taught to laugh at my wit and weep at my kindness and calculate my rent roll to the shilling. I am done with them." There was, in truth, more to his haste than he had confessed, and he did not intend to confess it. Not a week passed. His cousin Alden had come to Rushwick uninvited, flushed with wine at 11 the forenoon, and stood in this very study to remind the Duke, with a smile that showed too many teeth, that a man of 38 with no wife and no child was a man whose fortune had, as it were, already begun to fall due. Alden had brought his creditors' patience to the edge of open threat. There were those in London holding his cousin's paper who had grown very interested indeed in the Rushwick succession, and who would grow more interested still with every childless year. Tyrrell had shown him the door, but the visit had left its residue, a cold certainty that time was no longer a thing he possessed in abundance, and that every season he delayed was a season Alden's friends spent counting the rooms of a house not yet theirs. A wife within the fortnight, a son within the 12-month. It was the only wall high enough to keep the wolves from the park gates. He would not tell the steward's daughter that she was to be that wall. Let her think herself merely convenient. "And so you turn to a steward's daughter with a father in the shadow of the gallows," Tyrian said, "because such a woman cannot laugh, and cannot weep, and cannot refuse." He turned. She had understood him precisely, and had put it more plainly than he had dared to himself, and there was no self-pity in the saying of it, only a cold accuracy that was, he realized with something like unease, a mirror held up to his own coldness. "You may refuse," he said. "I compel no one to the altar. Refuse, and I keep the no and use it. Consent, and I burn it before your eyes tonight, and settle upon your family an income that will keep your mother and your sisters in comfort for the rest of their lives. The choice is entirely yours, Miss Ambry." He said it lightly as a man lays down a winning card. "And the note," she said. "Who held it before you? You said you bought it this morning. From whom?" He had not meant to tell her, but the plain demand drew it out of him. "From young Braithwell, the late Lord's son and heir, a man of your own years, and a great friend of my cousin's, which is how the thing came first to my ears. He has been sitting on your father's debt these 6 months like a cat at a mouse hole, letting it fatten with interest he never meant to see paid, because a steward in Gale is a debt he need never account for, and a name he may blacken to cover the state of his father's books. Your father is not the only man who cannot find Lord Braithwell's money. The son cannot find a great deal of it either, and a hanged steward tells no tales in a courtroom. He watched that land. I do not tell you this to comfort you. I tell you so that you understand the machinery you were caught in before I lifted you out of it, and understand that I did not build it. I merely bought it. You bought it," Tyrion repeated, "to use upon me. Yes. Then you and young Braithwell are more alike than you would care to hear, your grace, save that his mousehole was a goal and yours is an altar." She said it without heat, as one states a sum. "The choice is entirely mine." "That is not a choice," she said. That is the same word spoken twice. She looked down at the document, at the black lines of his solicitor's hand, and Tyrell watched her read it through, all of it, slowly. The way a woman reads who has learned that the ruin of families lives in the clauses "gentlemen, assume no one will trouble to read." He had expected tears by now. He had steeled himself against them. Tears were the weapon he trusted the drawing-room daughters to reach for, and he had rehearsed his indifference to them. She shed none. When she reached the foot of the page she looked up and asked a question he had not prepared for at all. "What manner of husband do you intend to be? I beg your pardon. You have told me what you require of a wife." And silence, the absence of sentiment. She folded her hands. "I am asking what I may require of a husband." "If I am to be bought, your grace, I would know the terms on both sides of the bargain, as any tradesman would. Will you be cruel to me? You have been cruel tonight. I should like to know whether it is your custom or only your welcome." For a moment Tyrell could not answer. In 11 years no one had asked him a question that assumed he owed an accounting of himself, and the novelty of it struck him harder than any reproach. The candle guttered in a draught from the frosted window and threw her face into gold and then into shadow. "I will not my hand to you," he said at last, stiffly. "I will not be unfaithful, for I have no appetite for the sport. You will have this house, and its servants, and money enough to want for nothing, and my name, which for all its coldness has never yet been dishonored. What I will not give you, what I have not to give anyone, is the article you plainly mean by the word husband. There will be no love in it. I have tried that country and found it a grave. If that is a bar to you, say so now, and take your father's fate upon your own head." He had meant the last to wound, and saw that it did. A small flinch, quickly mastered, but she did not weep and she did not rise to go. She drew the inkstand toward her and dipped the pen and held it above the paper, and there she paused, and the pause was the longest silence Rushwick had held in a decade. "My father is a foolish man," she said quietly, to the paper and not to him, "but he is a gentle one, and he has never in his life kept a farthing that was not his own. Whatever passed through his hands, another hand took it. I know this as I know my own name. And I know also that no magistrate will believe a steward over a lord, nor a poor girl over a duke. So I will not waste my breath telling you he is innocent, for you have no reason to care whether he is, and a great deal of reason to prefer him guilty, since his guilt is what puts me across your desk." She lifted her eyes. "I sign because I love him, your grace, not because you have frightened me. I want you to understand the difference, since you set such store by understanding your own bargains. You have not bought my fear. You could not buy it. I gave it up years ago, when we lost the living, and I learned there is very little left to frighten a woman who has already been poor." You have bought my love for another person and turned it to your use. That is a colder thing than you know, and I think one day it may trouble even you. And she signed, Tyrion Embry. The letters small and firm and unhurried, and she blotted them with care, and set the pen down, and folded her hands again, and waited. Tyrell stood over her, and for reasons he could not name the triumph he had promised himself did not come. He had won. The paper was signed, the succession secured, the fool Alden shut out of Rushwick forever. He had gotten precisely what he had ridden out at midnight in the cold to get, and yet her last words sat in his chest like a swallowed stone, and he found he wanted absurdly to defend himself to a woman he had bought, to tell her that he had not always been a man who traded in gallows, that once he had been the sort who believed the pretty promises, and that a woman with grey eyes very like her own had taught him, thoroughly and forever, what such belief was worth. He said none of it. He crossed instead to the fire, and took up the second document, the note against her father, the £400 debt with its ugly implication of theft, and he held it a moment where she could see it, and then he laid it upon the coals. The paper cork curled and blackened. Her father's name flared briefly gold and was gone. Tyrion watched it burn without expression, and only when it had crumbled entirely to ash did Tyrell see her shoulders lower a fraction. The smallest loosening of a burden carried so long she had forgotten its weight, and the sight of it, that private, unguarded easing meant for no one to witness, moved him more than any thanks could have done, and he resented it and turned his face away. "It is done," he said. "You will be married from this house in a fortnight. My steward will call upon your mother tomorrow to settle the income. She need not know the manner of it. Let her believe you have made a great match. Let the whole county believe it. It will go easier for you if they envy rather than pity you, and they will do neither if they guess the truth." He rang the bell. "A room has been prepared. My housekeeper, Mrs. Denby, will see you to it. You will not return to your mother's cottage tonight. The roads are bad, and the arrangement, once made, is best not left loose. You have thought of everything, your grace." "I have had a great deal of practice at thinking of everything," he said, "and no practice at all at anything else." It came out before he could stop it, more truthfully than he intended, and he saw her mark it, saw the grey eyes flicker with something that was neither triumph nor pity but a kind of grave attention, as though he had shown her, without meaning to. A crack in a wall she had supposed to be solid stone. He did not like it. He liked still less that a part of him had wanted her to see it. The door opened and Mrs. Denby came in, round and grey and long-schooled to ask no questions, and made her curtsy, and looked from the Duke to the plainly dressed young woman with the ink still upon her signature, and if she wondered what her master had done she was far too wise to let it reach her face. "Mrs. Denby, this is Miss Embry," Tyrell said. "She is to be my wife. You will treat her as your mistress from this hour, and you will silence any tongue in the servants' hall that says otherwise. See her comfortable. She has had a long night." The housekeeper's composure cracked exactly once, a widening of the eyes, instantly smothered, and then she curtsied again lower. She had served the family since Tyrell was a boy in short coats. She had watched the winter that closed him, and had grieved it in her plain way, and if there was in her lowered face now the faintest tremor of a hope she had long since ceased to permit herself, the Duke chose not to see it. "Yes, your grace. Miss Embry, if you would follow me. There's a fire lit and a warming pan in the sheets. You'll not take a chill." Kindness offered plainly, and Tyrell watched the young woman receive it, and saw her breath catch, and understood in a flash of unwelcome insight that it was not his cruelty that would undo her composure, but the smallest ordinary tenderness, that she had been braced all night against the whip, and had no armour at all against the warming pan. She mastered it. She rose and gathered her thin shawl, and paused at the door, and turned back to him. "You did not ask my name," she said. "In all the hour of our bargain, your grace, you named my father, and your cousin, and your solicitor, and your house. You did not once ask what I am called, until you gave me to your housekeeper as a thing to be made comfortable. I only observe it. You said you set store by understanding your bargains. I think you do not yet understand this one at all." She went out, the door closed, and Tyrell, Duke of Rushwick, stood alone in the study he had chosen for its coldness, before a fire that had just consumed a man's ruin, and discovered that he could not for his life remember when a woman had the last word with him, nor why the having of it should leave him standing so long at the dead ashes, turning her name over and over in the silence. Tyrion, as though it were a coin of some country he had meant never to visit again. He did not sleep that night. He told himself it was the cold. He rose before the servants and rode out along the frozen river as the sun came up grey over the reeds, and drove his horse harder than the ice made wise, and could not outrun the single unwelcome fact that had lodged in him across the desk and would not be dislodged, that he had gone to buy a silence, and had brought home instead a woman who spoke the truth to him as no one had dared in 11 years. And that some starved and buried part of him, the part he had killed and mourned and thought safely interred, had listened to every word she said, and wanted, God help him, to hear her speak again. He came in from the river with the cold still on him, and found her at the long window of the breakfast room, where no guest of Rushwick had ever been left to stand alone, watching the grey light move on the frost. She had not heard him. That was the first thing Tyrell noticed, and displeased him to notice it, that a man might come upon her unguarded and learn something. She stood very straight in the same plain grey stuff she had worn across his desk, for she had brought nothing else, and she was looking out at the lawns as though she were counting them, or measuring them, or committing them to memory against some day she might be turned out and want to remember. There was no wonder in her face. He had seen 100 women brought for the first time into the state-rooms of Rushwick, and every one of them had let the wonder show, the quick greedy inventory of a fortune within reach. Tyrion Ambrey looked at his acres as a woman looks at weather, a thing that would do as it pleased and could not be owned by wishing. "You are early," he said, and had the satisfaction of seeing her startle, and the lesser satisfaction, a moment after, of disliking himself for having wanted it. "I have kept to poor household's hours all my life, your grace. The fire wants laying before the sun is up, or the room is cold when the family rises. I did not think to unlearn it overnight, because there are servants now to lay it for me." She turned from the window. "I asked your Mrs. Denby whether I might make myself useful in some quarter of the house until the wedding. She looked at me as though I had proposed to swim the moat. I collect that a duchess is not permitted to be useful." "A duchess is permitted to do whatever she wishes," Tyrell said, crossing to the sideboard where the covered dishes stood in their silver, "provided she wishes for nothing that would disgrace the name. Sweeping hearths would disgrace it." "Then the name is more delicate than I am," she said. "I have swept a great many hearths and taken no harm." He looked at her over the chafing dish. She had said it without heat, without the barbed sweetness the drawing-room daughters used when they wished to seem humble and be admired for it. She had said it as a plain report of fact, the way she had told him across the desk that his cruelty had bought her love and not her fear. He was beginning to understand, simply the manner of her, that she said the true thing in an even voice and let it lie where it fell, and did not chase it with a smile to soften it, nor with a glance to see how it had landed. He had spent 11 years among people who did nothing but chase their words, and the absence of the chase unsettled him more than any insolence could have done. "Sit," he said. "You will eat. You are to be married from this house, and I will not have Mrs. Denby report that I starved you into the bargain." She sat, but she did not fall upon the food as a hungry woman might have leave to do. She ate a little and neatly, and Tyrell, who had meant to read his letters and ignore her, found instead that he was watching the economy of it, the way a woman eats who has known what it is to make one meal answer for two, and cannot quite persuade her hands, even in a duke's breakfast room, that the plenty will still be there tomorrow. It was not pitiable. That was the strange part. There was a dignity in it that no abundance could have lent her, and it occurred to him unwillingly that he had never in his life sat across a table from a person who was not in some degree performing for him, and that the novelty was not comfortable and was not pleasant. "You will want occupation," he said abruptly, folding a letter he had not read. "Since you may not sweep, there is a library. It is large, and no one has troubled it in years, and you may consider it yours. My mother kept a still room and a poultry yard and a great deal of correspondence with tenants' wives. You may take up any of it or none. The running of the house Mrs. Denby will surrender to you by degrees, when the servants have grown used to the notion." Beyond that, he stopped, because he had come to the edge of the thing and found he did not know how to say it in a breakfast room, in daylight, with the frost on the window. Beyond that, Tyrion said, quite steadily, setting down her cup, there is the reason you brought me here, which we named plainly at your desk and need not grow shy of over the eggs. You require an heir. That is the whole of the bargain, stripped of its paper. I understood it when I signed. I understand it now. You need not manage me toward it as though I were a nervous mare, your grace. I am not a girl who has been told nothing of the world. I know what a marriage is for in your reckoning, and I have consented to it with my eyes open, and I will keep my word. She met his look without flinching. I only ask that you not pretend between us that it is anything gentler than it is. I can bear a great deal. I cannot bear to be lied to kindly. My mother has been lied to kindly all her life, and it has left her unable to tell a friend from a creditor. I would rather have the cold truth from you than the warm falsehood. You told me you had no love to give. Very well. Do not counterfeit it, and I shall not counterfeit anything either, and we shall deal honestly, which is more than most married people ever manage. Tyrell set down his own cup with a care that betrayed him, for the china rang faintly against the saucer, and he was a man whose hands did not shake. In all the arranging of this, the solicitor, the debt bought up, the clauses drawn to leave her father no road but the one that ran through Rushwick, he had thought of the getting of an heir as one thinks of a term in a contract, a thing to be secured, cold as the succession itself. He had not thought of the woman who would have to bear it saying it back to him in the morning light, over the eggs in an even voice, calling it by its true name and asking only that he not dress it in ribbons. It shamed him. He had not expected to be shamed. He had armoured himself against her tears and her pleading and her scheming, and had come to the table wholly unprovided against her honesty, which went through the armour as though it were paper, and touched the quick. You are a very singular woman, he said, and heard the stiffness in it, and could not help it. I am a very poor one, she answered. The two are often mistaken for each other. When you have nothing, your grace, you cannot afford illusions. They are a luxury of the comfortable. I learned to see things as they are, because seeing them as I wished them would have starved us. It is not a virtue. It is only a habit that hunger taught me. She rose and gathered the shawl she had laid across the chair back, that thin, mended shawl that had no business in his house. And Tyrell found himself looking at the mending of it, the small even stitches, the care taken over a garment not worth the caring, and something turned over in his chest that he did not choose to examine. I will find your library. Thank you for the breakfast. It was more than I am used to, and I am obliged to you for it, though I know you did not mean it as a kindness. She was at the door when the hooves came. Tyrell heard them before he saw the carriage, the smart double beat of a matched pair driven fast up the frozen avenue, and knew them and felt the old weariness settle over him like a familiar coat. He had sent no summons. He had wanted, above all things, the fortnight quiet. But there was only one person in the county who arrived unannounced at Rushwick as though she owned the freehold of it, and drove her horses to Lather to be first with any news, and that was his cousin. Cornelia, he said, half under his breath, and crossed to the window in time to see her handed down from the carriage in a froth of furs and feathers, all colour and confidence, calling something up to the coachman and laughing at her own wit before anyone had heard it. Cornelia Waplington had been raised to believe Rushwick would be hers, or her son's, in default of any other heir, and had ordered a great portion of her life around that belief. She had furnished her expectations more richly than her drawing-room. Tyrell had let her believe it because it cost him nothing and spared him the tedium of correcting her. He understood, watching her sweep toward his door with the news of his solicitor's movements plainly already in her possession, for Cornelia paid better than he did for gossip, that the belief was about to cost him a great deal after all. He turned. Tyrion had stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and was looking not at the window, but at him, at whatever had come into his face at the sight of the carriage, and he saw that she had read it, all of it, in the space of a breath, that the woman arriving was a danger, that the Duke did not wish her there, that the ground of the house had shifted. She did not ask. She simply stepped back from the door, quietly, out of the sight line of the hall, and said, "Lo, shall I go up, or shall I stay and be looked at? Tell me which serves you, your grace." and I will do it without a scene. I am not afraid of being stared at by a fine lady. I have been stared at by better and worse. But I will not be the cause of your being caught off your guard in your own house if a moment's warning can spare you it. It stopped him. He had expected. He did not know what he had expected. That she would shrink or preen or ask who the lady was and whether she was very grand. Instead, she had in the instant set aside her own dignity to guard his, and asked only how she might be of use to him, the very use he had told her a duchess was not permitted, and the plainness of it. Offered without calculation to a man who had bought her and burned her father's name, and given her no cause on earth to shield him, undid something in Tyrrell that 11 years of careful cold had frozen shut. "Stay," he said. The word surprised him. "Stay and let her look. She will learn of it within the day whatever I do. She has already learned the half. Better she see you standing in my breakfast room, mistress of it, than imagine you skulking in a garret. Only," and here he came toward her, and dropped his voice, for the hall was near, "she is clever and she is cruel, and she will smile at you while she cuts, and she will study you for the place to put the knife. She will speak of your father. She will speak of your gown. Do not answer her. Whatever she says, do not. I know how to be insulted by a lady," Tyrion said, and there was, for the first time, the smallest gleam far back in the grey eyes, not quite humour, but the near neighbour of it. "It is a thing the poor learn early and practice often. You need not school me in it. Only stand where I may see you if you will, so that I know when you would have me silent. I can rid a room well enough. I have had to." And then the doors of the hall were flung open without a knock, and Cornelia Woplington came in on a wave of cold air and scent, her furs still on, her feathers dancing, and she stopped 3 steps into the room at the sight of the plain grey figure standing composed beside the Duke, and her painted face performed, in perfect sequence and for the space of a heartbeat, astonishment, calculation, and welcome. The welcome arriving last and least convincing, laid over the calculation like a cloth over something that would not quite be hidden. "Tyrrell," she cried, all warmth, her arms half out. "You wretch, you have not written in a month, and I hear from my milliner, if you please, that Rushwick's solicitor has been 3 times to a cottage in Nethercombe. I could not credit it. I said, my cousin does not do business in cottages. And here I find." The bright eyes swept Tyrion head-tem, taking the inventory Tyrrell had watched 100 women take of his rooms, only now of a woman, and finding, the arch of the brow announced, very little to inventory. "Here I find you keep company I was not told of. Will you not present me? I am all curiosity." "Such a very quiet gown, Miss Ambry," Tyrrell said, and he set the name down between them like a stone laid in a wall, "deliberate, load-bearing, who is to be my wife. Tyrion, my cousin, Mrs. Woplington. She has come a long way in the cold to be the first with the news, and now she has it, and may rest." He watched it strike her. He had chosen the words to strike, and they did. The colour went out of Cornelia's face beneath the paint, and came back in a rush. And the feathers trembled where nothing else was permitted to, and for one instant the welcome fell away altogether, and there was only the naked thing beneath it. The fury of a woman watching an inheritance she had spent 30 years spending walk out the door in a mended shawl. Then she laughed, a high, bright, brittle laugh, expensively schooled, and clapped her gloved hands together as though delighted. "Your wife, Tyrrell, you sly creature, and from Nethercombe, how romantic! How very democratic of you." The eyes went to Tyrion again, and now they were knives, and now they smiled. "My dear Miss Ambry, was it? You must forgive an old friend of the family her surprise. We had all quite given up on his ever marrying, you know. He has refused the loveliest girls in 3 counties, the Denholm sisters, the Lady Marcotte, fortunes and faces both, and here he well. You are to be congratulated, I am sure. However did you contrive it? Do tell. Was it very sudden?" The insult sat inside the question like hook inside a worm. Tyrrell felt the whole cold weight of his cousin's contempt behind it. The assumption that a girl from a cottage could have got a duke only by trick or trap or worse, and the invitation, sweetly extended, for the girl to shame herself by defending it. He drew breath to end it. But Tyrion, without haste, without heat, set her thin hand for a moment on the back of the chair she had risen from, and answered before he could. "It was very sudden, ma'am," she said. "The Duke came to us on a bad night with a matter of business and settled it. and was so good as to ask me to marry him before he left. I could give you no better account than that, for I have none. As to contriving, I fear I am too poor to contrive anything. Contrivance is dear. I had only what I stood in, and I stand in it now, so you may see for yourself the whole of my fortune. If he has chosen ill, the fault is his. He is reckoned a clever man, and had every chance to choose better, as you say. But he did not ask the Denholm sisters what manner of husband he meant to be, and I did. Perhaps that is the whole of the contrivance. It is the only one I know. The room went very still. Cornelia's smile hung a moment where she had left it, orphaned, while behind the eyes the wit scrambled for its footing and did not quite find it. For there is no reply to a woman who agrees she is nothing and turns the agreeing into a blade and lays it smiling at the feet of the man in the room. And Tyrrell, Duke of Rushwick, who had promised himself he would not smile, who had not smiled in company in longer than he cared to count, felt the corner of his mouth betray him, and turned his face toward the window to hide it, and could not, for his life, look away from the plain grey figure who had just, without raising her voice, without one word he could have taught her, laid his brilliant cousin's cruelty called upon his own breakfast-room floor, and understood, with something that was not triumph and was not comfort and would not let him be, that the fortnight he had wanted quiet was going to be nothing of the kind, and that the trouble was not Cornelia at all. The betrothal assembly was Mrs. Denby's doing more than his own, though Tyrrell had signed the invitations and let the thing be got up in his name. A duke did not marry from Rushwick in secret. To do so would set the very tongues wagging that he most wished stilled, and so the great hall that had not seen candlelight in 11 years was scoured and warmed and hung, and half the county came in their carriages through the cold to look upon the woman who had done what 3 seasons of scheming mothers could not. He stood at the head of the room in a coat the colour of wet slate, and watched them arrive, and told himself he watched only to gauge the temper of the crowd. It was not true. He watched the door for one grey-eyed figure, and when Tyrion came down the stair in the plum silk his money had bought, and Mrs. Denby's needle had fitted, he found that his breath went a little shallow, and he was angry with himself for it, and could not for all his anger look away. She was not the handsomest woman in the hall, and every woman in the hall knew it, and had come chiefly to confirm it, but she carried herself down the last 3 steps as though she had been born to descend that stair, without haste and without apology, and when the murmur ran round the room, that hiss of silk and whispered malice that Tyrrell had heard 100 times aimed at others and never troubled to pity, she did not falter, nor blush, nor drop her eyes. She met the room as she had met him across his desk, squarely, and taking its measure, and giving it nothing to feed upon. It was Lady Cornelia Waplington who struck first, as Tyrrell had known she would. Cornelia was the daughter of a viscount and the niece of a bishop, and she had spent the better part of 2 years arranging to become Duchess of Rushwick, an ambition she had pursued with all the cold patience of a woman who has never once been told no by anyone who mattered. She was beautiful in exactly the manner the drawing-rooms prized, golden, high-coloured, quick to laugh, and she had come tonight in diamonds, which Tyrrell understood, seeing them to be a kind of declaration of war. She crossed the floor with 2 companions in her wake, a Mrs. Fairsham and the young Lord Braithwell himself, and Tyrrell's jaw tightened to see Braithwell in his house, but he had invited the whole neighbourhood, and could not now unmake the list. "Miss Ambry," said Cornelia, in a voice pitched to carry, and dropped a curtsy so shallow it was nearer an insult than a courtesy. "How brave you are! I said to Mrs. Fairsham not an hour ago, there is a woman who does not care a straw what the world says of her gown, and here you stand to prove me right. 3 seasons old, is it not? One admires the economy. In these hard times we ought all to be so thrifty, though of course not all of us are obliged to be." She smiled, and the diamonds caught the candlelight, and a little ripple of amusement went round the nearest guests like a draught under a door. Tyrrell moved to speak. He was perhaps 4 paces distant, and the cruelty had been offered loudly enough that his answering it would have been the natural thing, the ducal thing, the closing of a matter with a word. But Tyrion, without so much as glancing his way, spoke first, and he held his tongue to hear her. "You are very kind to notice it, my lady," she said, and her voice was mild and clear and entirely unhurried. It is 3 seasons old, and has been let down twice, and turned once, and I dare say a sharp eye can find the seams. But it is paid for. Every yard of it is paid for, which in these hard times, as you say, is not a thing all of us can claim of our diamonds. She let that rest a half-heartbeat no longer before she gentled it. I mean no unkindness. Only that I have learned to prize what is honestly come by above what merely shines. It is a poor lesson, I know, and dearly bought. I would not wish the schooling on anyone. For a moment no one laughed at all. Then Mrs. Fairsham gave a small strangled sound and turned it hastily into a cough, and Lord Braithwell's face went a colour that had nothing to do with the fire. For it was well enough known in that room whose books were in disorder, and whose father's moneys had gone astray, and Tyrian had said not one word of accusation, and somehow left the whole matter hanging in the air like smoke. Cornelia's smile did not move, but something behind her eyes did a flinch, quickly mastered, the look of a duellist who has thrust at an unarmed woman and felt the point turn neatly aside and back against her own breast. Tyrrell, watching, felt an emotion so unfamiliar that it took him a moment to name it, and when he named it he was astonished, for it was pride. Sharp and absurd and wholly unearned, the pride of a man watching something of his own acquit itself well before a hostile house, save that she was not his, not truly, and had bested the room without the least help from him. He gave her that help notwithstanding, and surprised himself in the giving. "Lady Cornelia," he said, and the whole knot of them turned, for the Duke of Rushwick did not commonly trouble to enter these skirmishes, and his voice fell across the group like a hand laid flat upon a table. "You have travelled a long cold road to admire my betrothed's economy, and I would not have you go unrewarded. Allow me." He drew Tyrion's hand through his arm, the first time he had touched her since the study, and he felt the small startled stiffening of her fingers and then their careful stillness against his sleeve, and the warmth of that stillness ran up his arm like a struck note. "Miss Ambry is to be mistress of this house within the week. I am aware there are those who reckon the place all rummaged elsewhere. They reckoned without me, which is an error I have watched a great many people make and have never yet seen them repeat. You will wish us joy, I think." It is what one does at a betrothal. And he looked at Cornelia with the flat grey patience he kept for men who owed him money, and waited. She wished them joy. Her voice was steady and her diamonds blazed, and her hatred, Tyrrell thought, was now a permanent article, fixed in place like a jewel in its setting. But she wished them joy, because a viscount's daughter humiliated in a duke's hall before 40 witnesses had no other coin to spend, and she spent it, and withdrew with her companions to the far end of the room to spend the rest of the evening telling it differently. He watched her go, and knew he had made an enemy where before he had merely had a nuisance, and found he did not much care, which was itself a thing worth remarking. For Tyrrell had built 11 years upon caring for nothing, and now stood with a steward's daughter on his arm caring, quite recklessly, that no one in his house should be permitted to make her small. "You need not have done that," Tyrian said, low, when the music had started up again and the room's attention had loosened from them. "I am aware I need not have," he said. "I do a great many things I need not do. It is one of the privileges of my rank, and very nearly the only one I enjoy." "You did it for your own name," she said, "not for me. I understand that. A slight to your betrothed is a slight to your judgment, and you will not have your judgment questioned in your own hall." She said it without rancor, laying it out the way she laid out everything, as a sum to be got right. "I would rather you did not spend your protection on me under a false accounting, your grace. I can bear Lady Cornelia. I have borne worse for longer, and from people with better reason. Save yourself the trouble." It ought to have relieved him to have his motives so tidily explained and dismissed. It was, after all, the very theory of himself he had spent a decade perfecting. Instead it needled him. "You are very certain you know why I do what I do." "I am very certain you would prefer me to think I know," she answered, "which is not at all the same thing, and which I have noticed you rely upon. It is a great deal easier to be thought cold than to be cold. I wondered at your desk, which you were." "I have not yet decided." She turned her grey eyes up to him, direct as a lamp, and there was no coquetry in it and no fear and no flattery, only that grave and level attention that undid him more thoroughly than any beauty had ever managed. "You said there would be no love in it." But you have just crossed a crowded room to defend a woman you bought, against a woman you might have had for the asking, and you did it before the whole county, which will cost you something in gossip and gain you nothing at all that a shrug would not have gained you cheaper. I only observe it. I make no more of it than that. Make nothing of it, he said more roughly than he intended, and you will be nearer the truth. As you like, she said, and let it go, and did not press, and the not pressing was worse than pressing would have been, for it left him standing with the thing unsaid and no one demanding he say it, and only his own chest insisting that he had not, in fact, defended his name at all. He had defended her. He had felt the loud contempt land upon her and had crossed the floor without deciding to cross it, moved by something under the level of decision, and he did not care to look too closely at what that something was. Supper was called, and he took her in, and the long candle-lit table with its 40 guests arranged itself into the familiar theatre of the county at feed, the careful seating, the practised laughter, the currents of alliance and slight running beneath the talk like the river under its rime. Tyrrell had presided over such tables since his father died and had learned to find them tedious past bearing. He found this one not tedious at all, and understood uncomfortably that the difference sat at his right hand. She did not perform. That was the whole of it, and it was everything. The women along the board displayed themselves, their wit, their accomplishments, their careful helplessness, and Tyrion simply attended, asking the shy young curate on her other side about his parish until the poor man forgot to be frightened of the company and spoke of his almshouses with real warmth, drawing out of a dull man the one interesting thing in him, which Tyrrell had never in his life thought to attempt with any dinner guest, and now watched her do as easily as breathing. Once down the table, Lord Braithwell essayed a sally, some remark about stewards and their arithmetic, offered to Cornelia, but pitched to be overheard. And Tyrrell felt Tyrion go still beside him, the old braced stillness of the study, and he set down his glass with a small deliberate click, and looked down the length of the candles at the young lord until the young lord discovered a pressing interest in his soup. He said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The room understood the look, as rooms always understood him, and the talk closed smoothly over the moment like water over a dropped stone, and beside him he felt the stillness ease, and heard her let out a breath she had not meant him to hear. And neither of them spoke of it, and it lay between them the rest of the meal like a thing shared. It was very late when the carriages were called and the county rolled away into the frost, well satisfied with an evening that had given them a fortnight's worth of talk. Cornelia was among the last, and she paused before the Duke in the emptying hall to make her farewells with a composure Tyrrell was obliged to respect even as he distrusted it. "A charming creature, your Miss Ambry," she said. "So very natural. One does hope the world proves kind to her, your Grace." It is not always kind, you know, to those who rise very suddenly and from very far down. People do talk so. They will want to know how it came about. A steward's daughter, and a duke who would look at no one for 11 years. Such a romance. I confess I long to know the whole of it myself. She smiled and drew on her glove, and the threat in it was so delicately made that a witness might have sworn there was no threat at all. "Good night, your Grace. My warmest wishes to you both." She went out to her carriage, and Tyrrell stood in the cooling hall and understood that she had told him, as plainly as her breeding permitted, that she meant to learn the manner of his marriage and to make of it whatever ruin she could. He filed it away. He had been threatened by better and outlasted them, but it sat less easily than such things were wont to sit, because it was no longer only his own name in the wind, and he found that the widening of the danger had, without his consent, widened him. He found Tyrion at the foot of the stair, taking a candle from Mrs. Denby, and he crossed to her, though he had meant to go up to his own rooms and had told himself the evening was concluded. "You did well tonight," he said, and heard how stiff it came, how unpractised. He had not paid anyone a compliment in longer than he could reckon. Better than well. You gave them nothing to carry away that they can use, and you did it without once being unkind, which is a harder thing than being clever and rarer. She considered him over the small flame. "That is very handsomely said, your Grace. I did not think you had it in you." It was not flattery returned. It was plain surprise, honest as a coin, and it landed truer than any gracious murmur could have done. "Lady Cornelia means us harm. You know that. She will not let a slight rest. I know it. And it does not trouble you. It troubles me more than it would have troubled me a fortnight ago, he said, before he had weighed whether to say it, which is itself a circumstance I have not yet accounted for. He stopped. He had not meant to go so near the truth twice in one evening. The candle threw her face into golden shadow as it had done in the study, and he was aware of the great house gone quiet around them, and the servants melted away, and the two of them standing in the ember light at the foot of the stair like the last two people in a cold and sleeping world. "Good night, Miss Ambry," he made himself say. "You will want your rest. There is a week's worth of the county to endure before the thing is done, and they will all of them look at you now, having something to look at. Good night, Your Grace." She turned up 2 steps, and then, as she had done at the study door, she turned back, and he braced for another observation laid quietly against his composure like a blade tested flat upon the skin. But she did not observe anything. She only looked at him a moment, grave and searching, as though she were revising some estimate she had made of him and had not yet the figures to complete the sum, and then she said, simply, "Thank you for the soup, for the look you gave over the soup. I know you will say you did it for your name. But I felt it done for me, and I will keep it as that, whatever you meant by it. A woman in my position learns to keep the kind things carefully. There are not so many of them that she can afford to throw one back for being the wrong shape." And she went up, the candle carrying her shadow huge and wavering along the cold-panelled wall, and was gone into the dark above. Tyrrell stood at the dead ashes a long while, as he had stood a fortnight before, and made no move to climb to his own bed. He had passed the evening telling himself he had defended his name, and she had unpicked that lie with 3 sentences, and thanked him for the truth beneath it, and the trouble, the whole and mounting trouble of it, was that he had wanted her to stay. When she turned up the stair he had felt the wanting like a hand closing round his throat, an appalling, undignified, wholly unfamiliar wish that she would come back down and go on talking to him, about the soup, about Cornelia, about anything at all, so that he might go on standing in the cold hearing a voice that did not want a single thing from him but the truth. He had built 11 years to be rid of exactly that wish. He had interred it with the winter that made him, and mourned it, and salted the ground. And a steward's daughter with a mended gown and grey eyes had walked up his stair with a borrowed candle, and left it standing wide awake in his chest, and he knew, with the cold clear dread of a man who sees the ice cracking under him and cannot reach the bank, that a week was not near long enough to learn how to want her less. Cornelia did not leave. He had known she would not. A woman who had ordered 30 years of her life around the certainty that Rushwick would one day fall to her or to a son of hers did not quit the field because a girl in a mended gown had bettered her over the eggs. She merely announced, with the radiant grievance of the injured, that she could not think of returning to town before the wedding, that it would be unnatural, unkind, a scandal in itself, for the Duke's nearest cousin to be absent when he took a bride, and she sent her maid up to the blue rooms to unpack. And she wrote a letter that afternoon which Tyrrell watched a footman carry to the post, and he did not need to see the direction to know it had gone to Alden, or to Braithwell, or to both. So the house that he had wanted quiet held now a small, bright, watchful enemy who dressed for dinner as though for battle and smiled at Tyrion across the candlesticks with a warmth that would have deceived anyone who had not seen a cat sit so before a nest. He should have been consumed by it. He had spent 11 years learning to reckon such threats coldly, to number a rival's advantages as a general numbers guns, and Cornelia's letter was a gun. Instead he found, to his private disgust, that the whole of his attention through the long ceremony of dinner ran not to his cousin's schemes, but to the foot of the table, where the woman he had bought sat straight-backed in the poor grey silk she owned and answered what was asked of her and offered nothing she was not asked. And once, when Cornelia said something honeyed and barbed about the difficulty of running a great house for a lady unused to servants, looked down the length of the mahogany and the silver and met his eyes for the space of a breath, and did not appeal to him, and did not flinch, but only looked, as if to say, "You see it too, and we need not speak of it," before she turned back and answered his cousin with a courtesy so plain it left the barb nowhere to lodge. He raised his glass to hide his face. It was becoming a habit, that hiding, and he did not like habits he had not chosen. When the cloth was drawn and Cornelia had swept the meagre company of aunts and a curate's wife off to the drawing-room to be gracious at them, Tyrrell did not follow. He told himself he had letters. He had no letters that could not keep. He went instead through the cold length of the west corridor. Past rooms shut these many years under Holland covers, because a maid had mentioned to Mrs. Denby, and Mrs. Denby had mentioned to him with the particular blankness she used when she wished him to notice a thing, that the new mistress had been seen carrying a lamp into the old still room off the disused wing. 3 nights running, after the house had gone to bed, he found her there. The still room had been his mother's once, and had stood dark since before the winter that had taught him what such rooms cost. The shelves were grey with dust and the copper stood green, and into this room Tyrian Ambry had brought a single lamp and a rush chair, and was seated at the scoured deal table with a ledger of some antiquity open before her and a row of stoppered jars, sniffing at each in turn and setting it to the left or the right with the grave attention of a physician. She had not heard him. For a moment he stood in the door and watched her work, the plain profile bent to the lamp, a smudge of dust on the wrist below her turned back cuff. The small frown of a woman solving something, and felt the thing move in his chest that he had spent 11 years walling up, and understood that the wall was not going to hold, and that he had come down this corridor precisely because he wished it would not. "You keep strange hours, Miss Ambry," he said, and had the small satisfaction of seeing her startle and then at once master it. "So it appears, do you, your grace?" She rose, because a duke had entered, and he saw the effort it cost her weary body to do it lightly, and something in that she would spend herself on the courtesy rather than let him see her tired, turned in him like a key. "I could not sleep. I am not accustomed to a bed that does not need me to be small in it, and I found this room by daylight and could not leave it be. It has good bones. Your mother knew her business. This is a receipt for a fever draught in her hand, I think, and a very sound one. And there is lavender still in that press that has kept its virtue 30 years, because whoever laid it down knew to do it in the dark of the moon." She caught herself. "Forgive me. You did not come to be lectured on lavender. Sit." It came out gentler than he intended. She sat, and after a moment, because to stand over her felt suddenly like the posture of the man who had pushed a paper across a desk and named her father's rope, he drew the second chair, dust and all, to the ruin of his coat, and sat as well across the deal table from her, in his mother's dead still room at an hour when no duke of his acquaintance sat anywhere but over his port. "Why does it want you?" he asked. "The bed. You said it does not need you to be small. Tell me what you meant." She was quiet a moment, and he braced for the evasion, the pretty turning aside that any of the Denholm sisters would have offered a man who asked a real question. It did not come. "At home there were 5 of us in 2 rooms after we lost the good house," she said, "and I am the eldest. My mother is a woman who feels things very hard and hides it very ill, so from the time I was 12 it fell to me to be the one who did not take up room. To be the one who was not frightened when the others were frightened, so there might be a still place in the house for them to come to. My father is a gentle man and an honest one, and no more fit to guard £400 of another man's money than a child is fit to guard a candle in a wind." And when the money could not be found and the whispers began, he took to his chair by the window and grew old in a season, and my mother wept where she thought I could not hear, and my sisters asked me what would become of us, and I told them we should do very well, because it was my office to tell them so. She turned one of the jars a slow quarter turn on the table, watching it, not him. "I am not telling you this to be pitied. I have a horror of it, if you want the truth. Pity is only contempt in its Sunday clothes, and I have had a bellyful of it from women who called on my mother to see how low we had come and went away comforted. I tell you because you asked me plainly, and because you are the only person in 11 years, I think, who has, and it seems a poor return for so rare a thing to hand you a lie. 11 years. She could not have known she had said his own number back to him. He felt it go through him all the same. "So," she went on, and now she did lift her eyes to him, and there was no reproach in them, which was somehow harder to bear than reproach. "I do not know how to lie in a bed that is only mine, with no one on the other side of the wall who needs me quiet. I keep waking to listen for them. This room is the nearest thing I have found to being of use. A small, wry motion of her mouth. A poultry yard would be better. Your Grace has a very fine disused poultry yard. I looked at it this morning and my hands fairly itched. He surprised himself with a sound that was very near a laugh, rustier than a laugh, a thing gone stiff from disuse, but its cousin. Then have it, he said. Have the poultry yard and the still room and the ruin of the west wing entire, and set your itching hands to all of it. I have not the smallest use for any of it, and it appears you have. I told you the house was yours. I find I meant it more than I knew when I said it. You did not mean it at all when you said it, she answered, gently, without accusation, the way one states a fact of weather. You said it as a man throws a coat over a puddle so a thing may be got across quickly. I do not hold it against you. You were buying an heir and settling a family, and you had no leisure to mean small kindnesses. I only think it does you credit that you should come to mean one, 3 days late in a cold room, when no one is by to see you do it. No one had spoken to him so in a decade. His people feared him, his equals flattered or fenced with him. Cornelia loved him the way ivy loves a wall, for what it may climb. This woman who owed him everything and had every reason on earth to fear him, sat in his mother's ruin and told him the plain truth of himself as though it were a kindness she could afford him because she asked nothing back, and it undid him, quietly and completely, in a way that no beauty and no fortune paraded before him in 11 years had come near. He looked at the smudge of dust on her wrist. He looked at the tired, honest, unbeautiful face turned up to the lamp, and he thought, with a kind of terror, that he had gone 11 years and made himself safe and had walked down a cold corridor of his own free will and undone the whole of it in the space of one supper. You should not say such things to me, he said. Lo, why not? Because I am not a man to whom such things are safely said. He heard the old iron come into his voice and could not stop it. It was the last defense he had. A woman said true things to me once, Miss Ambry, in a winter 11 years gone, and I believed them, and they were the most accomplished lies I have ever been told, and they cost me a great deal more than £400. I resolved after that never to be reached again. I have kept the resolve. It has served me. I bought you as I would buy a horse or a bill of exchange precisely because I did not intend ever again to be reached, and it is a poor bargain for you if you begin now to reach me, for I do not know what I am worth reached. I have not been in a long time. He had never said it aloud, not to any living soul, and he did not know why he said it now, in a dead room to a girl he had wronged, except that she had told him the truth of her small rooms and it seemed a debt. She did not exclaim. She did not reach across the table for his hand, which some part of him, God help him, half wished she would. She sat with it the way she had sat with everything, and let it be true in the room a moment before she answered. Then we are neither of us worth much reached, Your Grace, she said at last. For I have been reached too, and lost by it, and learned the same lesson in a cheaper school. But I will tell you what I have decided, sitting up these 3 nights in your mother's room. I have decided I would rather be worth little and reached than worth a great deal and walled up, because I have seen the walled up kind. I have one for a mother, near enough, and there is no colder thing on this earth than a heart that has made itself safe. I do not say it to you as counsel. You did not buy my counsel. I say it because you told me a true thing, and I owe you one in kind, and that is the truest one I have. The lamp guttered and steadied. Somewhere far off in the great house a door closed and Cornelia's bright laugh carried thin down the corridors, like a thread of cold air finding a crack, and Tyrrell did not so much as turn his head, because Tyrian had set her hand flat upon the old ledger between them, to smooth a curling page, and his own hand had come to rest an inch from hers upon the deal without his willing it, and neither of them moved it. He looked at the small space between their 2 hands on the scarred wood, a hand's breadth, no more, of dusty table and lamplight, and it seemed to him a wider country than any he owned, and more dangerous, and he wanted with an ache that frightened him to cross it. 11 years he had been proof against wanting. He had made an art of it, a discipline, a coldness so complete that men who feared him could not have said whether there was anything left inside the frost to fear. And here it was undone by Earl's chapped hand lying still upon a ledger, asking nothing, taking nothing, only there, nearer to him than any living thing had been permitted in a decade, and he the one, for once, who trembled at the nearness. He did not. He was a man who had spent 11 years not crossing such distances, but he let his hand stay where it was, near hers, not touching, and she let hers stay, and for the length of several breaths the two of them sat in his mother's ruined still room and said nothing at all and did not move apart. And it was the nearest thing to tenderness that had been in the house in longer than the copper had stood green. It was she who drew back first, not sharply, but as one who knows the worth of a thing is partly in not spending it all at once. "You should go up, your grace," she said softly. "Your cousin will wonder where you are, and it is not wise, I think, to give Mrs. Waplington questions she must invent her own answers to. She is very clever at inventing." The name brought the cauldron colder. "You have taken her measure quickly. I took it over the eggs. She means me harm. No, do not trouble to be gallant about it. I am not a girl who needs it softened. She had this house counted as hers, and I am the thing standing between her son and 30 years of counting, and women do not forgive that. She wrote a letter this afternoon. I saw the footman take it. It went south and west by the way he turned in the yard, toward Braithwell's country, if I have the map of your county right, and Braithwell is the man who holds the whispers against my father." She said it evenly, folding her hands now in her lap, out of the lamp's small circle, and he understood that she had seen all of it that he had seen, and further, and had said nothing at dinner because it was her office, still and always, to be the still place while others were afraid. "So there is a letter gone to the one man in England with cause and means to ruin my father's name past any burning of a note, carried by your cousin who wishes me gone, and I should be a great fool to sit up counting lavender and not count that too. I do not tell you to alarm you. I tell you because I cannot bear to be managed, and I will not begin whatever it is we are to have, by pretending I do not see the storm coming when I can hear it in the yard. Only that." He rose, because she had told him to, and because if he sat one moment longer with his hands breadths from hers he did not trust the 11 years to hold at all. At the door he stopped. She had taken up a jar again, bent again to the lamp, resuming her guard over his mother's dead room as though the conversation had cost her nothing, and it wrung him that she should have to. "Miss Ambry," she looked up. "Whatever my cousin has set going with that letter, you will not stand in it alone. I did not buy you to feed you to Braithwell and Cornelia between them. Understand me, I keep what is mine." Something crossed her face too quick to read, and was governed. "I am not sure I like to be kept, your grace, as one keeps a thing," she said, "but I find I am glad tonight not to be alone in it. We will call that enough for one cold room." And she bent again to the lamp, and he went out into the dark corridor with his heart in a state he had 11 years' practice at denying and no strategy left that would answer it, and down the far end Cornelia's light stayed burning long past the hour that honest people slept. The days that remained before the wedding ought, by every calculation Tyrrell had made at the outset, to have crawled. He had meant them to. He had arranged this marriage as a man arranges a bridge to be crossed once and never admired, and he had expected the waiting to be a tedium borne for the sake of the far bank. Instead, the mornings came quick and went quicker, and he found himself keeping them by a new reckoning. The hour she came down to the library, the hour the light moved off the long window and she looked up from his mother's tenant's letters with ink upon her finger, and a question about a widow in the eastern cottages she thought had been forgotten, the hour at dusk, when they walked the frozen terrace, because neither of them would be the first to say they walked it for the company, and the breath of them went up white together into the bare limes, and once on the third evening, her gloved hand had come to rest an instant on his sleeve at the top of the steps, and neither of them had moved it, and he had stood in the cold with his heart going like a boy's, and understood that the far bank was not where he had thought it, and that he did not, God help him, wish the bridge any shorter. He had told her that same dusk, more than he had told any living soul of the winter 11 years gone, not the whole of it, but the shape of it, that he had once believed a face because it was fair and its owner said tender things in a low voice, and had learned, too late and at ruinous cost, that the tenderness had been got up for the settlement and struck like a stage set the hour the settlement failed. He had said it flatly as a warning, as though to caution her against expecting a warmer man than she had bargained for. She had listened without pity, which was the only way he could have borne to be heard, and had said only, "Then you were robbed young and taught to call the wound wisdom. It is a common enough schooling. It is only a pity it is so dear." And he had not answered, because there was no answer, and because she had named in a breath the thing he had spent a decade dressing as a virtue. So he was unguarded. That was the truth he would flay himself with afterward, in the black hours. That on the morning it came he was as near to happy as he had been since he was a young man, and had let the drawbridge of himself down, and was standing in the open gate of his own life whistling, when the thing rode in. It came at 11, with the frost still on the park, in the form of Lady Cornelia Waplington's travelling carriage sweeping up the drive, though no one at Rushwick had asked her, and behind it a second, plainer conveyance that Tyrrell did not know. He was in the hall when Grigson opened to them, and he had time only to see that Cornelia's face wore an expression he had never had from her before, not the bright brittle malice of the betrothal night, but a grave, downcast, almost tender concern worn like mourning, before she was across his threshold with Mrs. Fairsham at her shoulder, and behind them the young Lord Braithwell, hat in hand and colour high, and behind him a narrow black-coated man of perhaps 50 with a leather case under his arm, and the particular deferential coldness of a person who is paid to be present at other people's ruin. "Your Grace," said Cornelia, and dropped him a curtsy of flawless depth, "forgive us. I would not for the world have come, and least of all this week, but Mr. Purley was of the opinion, and Lord Braithwell agreed with him, and so at last did I, though it broke my heart, that you had a right to know a thing before you were bound past unbinding. I could not let you be deceived, Tyrrell. Whatever else lies between us, I could not do that. You will say what you have come to say," Tyrrell answered, "and quickly, for you have come uninvited, and I am to be married on Thursday, and have no leisure for riddles." The black-coated man cleared his throat. "Alaric Purley, your Grace, attorney of the town. I act in the matter of the late Lord Braithwell's estate. The accounts, that is, that were in the keeping of Mr. Joshi Ambry as steward." He said the name and let it lie in the cold hall. And Tyrrell felt the first true chill go through him, for he had bought that name's ruin and burned it and thought it ended. "There has been a further discovery, your Grace, in the going over of the books, not the 400 only. A quantity of plate, and certain jewels of her late ladyship's, entered as sold in a year they were not sold, and never accounted for after. Lord Braithwell was minded to let the matter sleep, out of delicacy toward the present connection. Lady Cornelia persuaded him it would be no kindness. "It would be no kindness," Cornelia said softly, "to let you marry a thief and get thieves' children upon Rushwick, and learn it after, when the law came knocking and it was your name in the newspaper. That is all. That is the whole of my crime today, Tyrrell, that I could not bear to see it done to you a second time." The words were chosen. He knew, even reeling, that they were chosen, that she had aimed them at the exact bruise he had let her glimpse across a decade of drawing-rooms, that a second time was a lever set with care beneath the one stone she knew would move him. He knew it, and it moved him all the same. That was the horror of the old wound, that a man might see the hand on the lever and feel the floor tilt regardless. Tyrion had come to the gallery above during the attorney's speech. He did not know how long she had stood there. She came down now, unhurried, in the grey she still wore of a morning, and there was no fright in her face, only the old braced stillness he had first seen across his desk, the stillness of a person counting the true cost of a thing before it is paid. "Say the rest, sir," she said to Purley quite steadily. "You have come with more than a suspicion, or you would not have brought a case under your arm. Say the rest." Purley looked for the first time, faintly ashamed of his office. "There is information, miss, that one of her late ladyships, that a certain sapphire cross, sapphire and brilliants, upon a gold chain, entered as sold in the 11th year and never sold, was seen but 2 days since, here, in this house, in your keeping." "That is a lie," said Tyrrell, before he had decided to speak, in a voice that fell across the hall like the flat of a sword, and for one clean instant the old man in him, the true man, stood square in the gate. But Cornelia had prepared for that too. "Then let it be disproved, and gladly," she said, "and we will all beg her pardon on our knees and dance at Thursday's wedding. Nothing would make me happier." Mrs. Fairsham had it from your own housemaid, the girl Ruth, I think, who was frightened near to sickness and did not know what to do, and came to me because she dared not come to you. Send for the cross, Tyrrell. Send Mrs. Denby to Miss Ambry's chamber and let her bring down the workbox that stands upon the press. If I am a slanderer, the box holds thread and nothing worse, and you may turn me out of doors forever, and I will go and hold my peace and know I deserved it. But send. He should have refused. He saw, afterward, in every reconstruction of that morning, the door by which he might have walked out whole. He might have said that no servant's whisper procured by Cornelia Waplington would be tested in his hall, that he would take his betrothed's word against a bought maid and a ruined lord, and a hired attorney and the whole cold county, that he knew the woman and needed no box open to know her. It was the truth. He believed it. He stood in the certainty of it as on solid ground. And then the ground moved, for it was the shape of the thing that undid him, the fair honest face, the low true voice, the tenderness that asked nothing. He had built a life upon the lesson that such a face was the most dangerous forgery in the world, that he above all men could not read one. That the last time he had trusted his own reading of a woman's honesty he had signed away his heart to a counterfeit and been left to burn. And here was honesty itself standing on his stair, and a black-coated man swearing there were sapphires sawn into its hem, and a voice out of 11 winters ago saying with terrible reasonableness a second time. He looked at Tyrian, and for the space of perhaps 3 heartbeats he could not be sure. The cold came down over him the way it had come down that long ago winter, a shutter dropping across a lit window, and he heard himself say, in a voice gone level and strange and awful, "Send for Mrs. Denby." He felt Tyrion's eyes on him as the words left him. He made himself meet them. It was the worst thing he had ever done, worse than the study, worse than the note, for what he saw in the grey of them was not fear and not anger, but a kind of quiet, dreadful comprehension, the look of a woman watching a door she had begun, foolishly, to think might open, swing shut and bolt. And worse than the shutting, the sight of whose hand was on the bolt. Mrs. Denby was sent for. She came and was told, and went white, and looked from a master to her mistress-to-be with an appeal in her face that no one answered, and climbed the stair with her keys chiming like small cracked bells. The whole stood silent. Braithwell studied the flags. Mrs. Fairsham arranged her face into sorrow. Cornelia alone was serene, her hands folded, her head a little bowed, the very image of a woman who takes no pleasure in a painful duty. And Tyrrell, watching her across the cold hall, thought with the small clear part of him that stood apart from his own drowning, she is not afraid. A slanderer at this pass is afraid, she is not. The thought reached him and could not save him, for Mrs. Denby was already coming down again with the workbox in her 2 hands held out from her body as though it might burn, and the whole hall bent toward it, and she set it on the long table and stood back and would not touch the lid. It was Pearlie who opened it, with a murmured "beg your pardon," and lifted out the tray of threads and thimbles and the half-hemmed handkerchief, and beneath, in the well of the box, wrapped in a twist of plain paper, lay the thing itself, a cross of sapphires deep as a night sky, ringed in old brilliants, on a chain of yellow gold, catching the grey light of the window and throwing it back blue across the shocked faces of the room. "Oh," said Mrs. Fairsham, on a soft satisfied breath, and had the grace, or the calculation, to lift her handkerchief to her mouth. Tyrrell looked at the cross and could not speak. He knew it. That was the second blow, the one Cornelia could not have known would land so hard. He knew the cross, had known it all his life, had watched it lie against his mother's black silk at Christmases in the years before everything, had thought it lost with so much else. To see it here, blue and cold in the well of a workbox, in his own hall, drawn up like a fish from dark water, some part of him that was only a grieving son and not a duke at all cried out at it, and the cry made him, for one moment more, savage and certain and wrong. Tyrrell. Cornelia's voice gentle, terrible. "I am so sorry, I am so very sorry." He turned to Tyrian. She had not moved. She stood with her hands quiet at her waist and her chin level, and she was looking at him, only at him, as though the box and the cross and the crowing woman and the whole freezing hall did not exist, as though there were one question in the world and its answer stood in a wet slate coat at the foot of the stair. "Ask me," she said. Her voice was low and did not shake. and it carried to every corner of the hall as Cornelia's schooled brightness never could. "You are a man who sets store by understanding his bargains. You told me so the first night, with my father's name in your mouth, so understand this one. I did not take it. I have never seen it before this hour. Someone laid it there in the 2 days since it was seen, in a room whose door does not lock, and I could name you the hand within the guess of a moment, and so, I think, could you." She did not once look at Cornelia. "But I will not stand here and swear it on my mother's grave, and I will not weep, and I will not go on my knees to the county to be believed, because a woman who must prove she is not a thief has already been robbed of the only thing that was ever truly hers. And I find I will not give it up so cheap. So I do not ask you to take Mr. Purley's oath, your grace. I ask you to take mine, or not. It is, after all," and here for the first and only time her voice bent, just perceptibly at the centre, like green wood before it breaks, "the whole of what our marriage was ever going to rest upon, is it not? Whether you could look at my face and know it. Look then, and tell me what you see." The hall waited. Every soul in it turned to him, and Tyrrell, Duke of Rushwick, who had faced down creditors and magistrates, and his own drunken hair without the flicker of an eye, stood before a steward's daughter in a mended grey gown and found that he could not, for the length of a breath he would remember on his deathbed, make himself speak, because the old winter had its hand upon his throat, and 11 years of scar tissue lay between his heart, which knew, and his mouth, which had been trained never again to trust the knowing. The silence went on 1 instant. It went on 2. It was not long. It was not, in the end, above 3 seconds of the whole of his life. But it was long enough for her to see it, the doubt, the flinching, the ghost of the other woman standing between them in his eyes, and he watched the lost light go out of her face as gently and completely as a candle pinched between 2 fingers. "I see," she said very quietly. "Thank you, your grace. You have answered after all." She turned to Purley then, composed, almost courteous, a woman putting her affairs in order. "I will not run, sir, so you need not fear it, and there is no call to distress the servants with a scene. I will go with you where you like, or wait in my room for the magistrate, whichever the law prefers. My father is old and ill and had no more to do with a sapphire cross than the man in the moon, and I will say so before any bench in England as long as there is breath in me. And it will do no good at all, because the law prefers the tidy verdict to the true one. A gentleman of my acquaintance taught me that, and I have found him, in all things, a reliable authority." The blow of it did not raise her voice by a hair. "I ask 1 hour to write to him, so that he does not read it first in a newspaper. After that I am at your disposal." She gathered her skirt to go up. On the 3rd stair she paused, without turning, and spoke into the cold air of the hall, and it was not to Purley, nor to Cornelia, who stood radiant with victory, decently veiled, nor to any of them. "You need not fret over the wedding, your grace," she said. "I release you of it entire. You wanted a bargain you could understand, and you have got it, cleaner than either of us drew it, for now there is nothing owing on your side at all. You may tell your cousin Alden he was near the mark, and you may keep the cross. It was your mother's. It ought never to have left this house." And she went up, unhurried, her hand light upon the rail, and the door of the upper gallery closed behind her without a sound. For a long moment no one in the hall stirred. Then Cornelia let out a small breath that might have been sorrow and was not, and began, in a low and gracious murmur, to say how dreadfully sorry she was, how she had prayed it would prove otherwise, how he must not blame himself, how none of them could have known. And Tyrrell stood at the foot of his own stair with his mother's sapphires cold and blue upon the table, and his heart clanging in the sudden wreckage like a bell in a burning tower, and understood, far too late, exactly what he had done, and what it was worth, and how nearly beyond mending, and could not for the life of him think of a single word to say to any of them, while above his head, behind a closed door, the one true heart in all his cold house sat down to write to her father that the winter had taken her too. The forged letter lay open on the study desk between tuned-out candles, and Tyrrell had read it so many times in the small dead hours that he no longer needed the paper to see it. He had it by heart now, every loop and blot of it. The letter got up in a hand very like Tyrian Ambry's own, in which she confessed to a confederate that she had gone to Rushwick meaning to marry the money and bleed its coffers dry for her father's rescue, and had found the Duke a colder fool than she had hoped, but a fool the same, and would have him to the altar before he learned his own arithmetic. It had been produced yesterday afternoon in the long gallery before a dozen witnesses, laid down upon the card table by young Lord Braithwell, with the flourish of a man playing a trump. He has kept up his sleeve since the deal, and Cornelia had watched Tyrrell read it with her golden head tipped and her lips parted in a sorrow so exquisitely counterfeit that a stranger might have wept for charity. And Tyrrell, this was the part he could not forgive himself. This was the thing that had kept him at the dead desk while the candles guttered and died. Tyrrell had gone cold. For the space of perhaps 10 seconds, standing in his own gallery with the paper in his hand, the 11 years had risen up in him like black water and drowned everything he knew. He had been here before. He had held a letter before, in another winter, in a hand he had thought he loved. The girl he was to have married, who had wept so prettily over him in the mornings and written so coldly of him by the same post the man she truly meant to have. And both letters had come into Tyrrell's hands in the one grey week that killed the man he might have been and raised in his place the Duke the county feared. He knew none better what it was to be a rich man's fool. And for 10 seconds he had looked at the woman with the grey eyes and the mended shawl and believed, with the whole cold weight of 11 years, that he had been made a fool a second time. He had seen her see it. That was the wound past bearing. Across the gallery Tyrion had watched the doubt come down over his face like a shutter over a window, had watched the warmth of a fortnight go out of him in a heartbeat. And she had not flinched and she had not pleaded. She had only gone very still, the old braced stillness of the study. And something in her grey eyes had quietly closed, and she had said, in the even voice that had never once lied to him, "I see you have read it, your grace. I will not insult you by telling you it is false, since a man who could believe it for even a moment is a man who never knew me. And there is no arguing a woman back into a heart that would put her out on the strength of a page." And she had curtsied to him, the small correct curtsy of a servant's daughter, and gone up the stair, and Cornelia had made a soft sound of triumph she had not troubled to hide. And Braithwell had begun, smoothly, to speak of magistrates. Sir Marchmain was to come this morning. That had been the arrangement made over Tyrrell's silence while he stood staring at the forgery, that the magistrate would ride out from the town at 10. To take Ambry the elder into custody upon the fresh evidence of deliberate embezzlement, and to witness, with a decent regret, the Duke of Rushwick's repudiation of a betrothal got up by fraud. Braithwell had proposed it. Cornelia had seconded it with a sigh. And Tyrrell had said nothing, because for 10 seconds he had been a man in black water, and by the time he had struggled back to the surface of himself, the thing was arranged around him like a snare drawn tight. But he had not slept. And a man who does not sleep has a long time to look at a piece of paper, and Tyrrell had spent that time not as the fool he had been in the gallery, but as the man who had bargained half the county out of its money, and had never in his life been cheated twice by the same hand. He lit a fresh candle. He took from the locked drawer the marriage settlement she had signed a fortnight since, and laid her true signature beside the forgery, and looked not with his heart, which was no use to him, but with his cold clear eyes, the ones the drawing-rooms feared. The hand was close. It was very close. Whoever had done it had a specimen of her writing to work from and had worked with care. But Tyrion Ambry, who had let down her own hems and mended her own gloves, wrote a small, economical, unhurried hand that never once lifted pen where it might be saved, and the forger, copying her, had lifted his pen a dozen times to look and copy and look again, so that under the candle the letters of the forgery stood very slightly apart from one another, hesitant, the hand of a man drawing a picture of writing rather than writing, and the ink was too new. He had bought enough men's silence to know how ink aged on a page, and this ink had not seen a week. It was not proof. It was the beginning of proof, and it was enough to make a cold man colder. He rang the bell before the light was up, and it was Mrs. Denby who came, dressed and grey-faced, for the whole house had lain awake. He asked her 3 questions. Who had carried Lady Cornelia's letter south and Westerson night past, and where had the man gone, and was he returned? And Mrs. Denby, who had served Rushwick since before the winter that made him, and had no more love for Cornelia Waplington than a cat has for a draught, told him that the second footman had carried it to Braithwell's own house, and had waited there a day, and had come back saying below stairs that his lordship kept a clerk shut up in the muniment room with the shutters closed and candles burning by day, a thin nervous man named Pinnock, who was writing something his lordship stood over and would let no one else see. Tyrrell stood a moment in the cold study with that in his hand, and the last of the black water went out of him, and what came up in its place was not the fool's grief of the gallery nor the old salted sorrow of 11 years, but something he had not felt in as long, a clean and terrible anger. Cold and level and entirely his own, he had let them arrange a snare around his silence. He would let them spring it, and stand in it, and pull it shut with their own hands, before the magistrate they had summoned to seal it. They gathered in the great hall at 10, as arranged, with the frost still white on the tall windows. Sir Marchmain came grave and punctual with his clerk and his warrant. Braithwell came in his best coat with the false letters in a portfolio under his arm and a witness at his elbow, a thin, nervous man he introduced as his own man of business, come to swear to the hands. Cornelia came in dove grey, having put off her diamonds for the occasion and put on instead a look of gentle sorrow, the tender grief of a kinswoman who takes no pleasure in another woman's fall and means to be seen taking none. And half a dozen of the county who had witnessed the gallery lingered still under the Duke's cold roof, drawn by the smell of a great house disaster, arranging their faces into concern and their bodies where they might see best. Ambry the elder had been sent for and stood white and shaking near the cold hearth, an old man of 56 who had been a good steward and a careless one and no thief at all, and who did not understand the half of what was being done to him, and Tyrian. Tyrrell's eyes went to her first and last. Tyrian stood a little apart near the foot of the stair, in the mended grey gown she had worn the first day, not the plum silk, and he understood the choice with a lurch of the heart. She had put off the things his money had bought, and put on again the woman he had tried to buy, and beside her on the flags stood a small corded trunk. She was dressed to leave. She had come down not to be tried, but to see her father through his trial, and then to walk out of Rushwick on her own 2 feet, asking nothing, taking nothing, before a man who had doubted her could put her out. She did not look at Tyrrell at all. Braithwell began. He was fluent. He had the letters out and read the worst of them aloud in a voice pitched for the magistrate, the Confederate's letter and the letter in Tyrion's counterfeit hand, and a little sound went round the county like wind in dry grass. Sir Marchmain's face grew long. He asked heavily whether the hands could be sworn to, and Braithwell turned with a small bow to the thin man at his elbow. "My clerk, Mr. Pinnock, has had the keeping of the Braithwell papers these 9 years," he said. "He knows the Ambry hand as he knows his own. He will swear to it." "Will he?" said Tyrrell. It was the first he had spoken, and the hall stilled, for the Duke of Rushwick's voice fell across the room the way it always fell, flat and level as a hand laid upon a table, and the county leaned to it. Tyrrell came down the room without haste and stood before the thin man, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not need to. "Mr. Pinnock," he said, "you kept the shutters closed at Braithwell 4 days this week, and burned candles by day, and let no man into the muniment room but his lordship, who stood over your shoulder. I have this from a servant who waited in the yard, and I will have it from your fellow clerks under oath within the day if I send for them, and I will send for them. You are about to swear before a magistrate of the king that a hand you drew yourself with a fresh pen and new ink is the true hand of that woman there." He turned his head 1 degree toward the grey-eyed figure by the stair, and turned it back. "Perjury before Sir Marchmain is the hulks, Mr. Pinnock, the same hulks his lordship has promised an innocent old man there, to cover the state of his own father's books. I have bought Lord Braithwell's paper. I bought the note against Ambry, and the note came with the ledgers, and I have read the ledgers, and I can tell this room within £100 where the late Lord Braithwell's money went, and whose hand drew it out, after Ambry's stewardship was ended. It did not go into a steward's pocket. It went to a young lord's creditors in town, and I have the entries in his lordship's own writing, and I will lay them before Sir Marchmain this hour." He let that fall into the frozen room and lie where it fell, and then he leaned the least degree toward the thin man, and said, almost gently, "So you may hang for Lord Braithwell this morning, Mr. Pinnock, or you may tell Sir Marchmain who set you to your writing, and keep your neck. I am a patient man. I will give you the length of one breath to choose. The clerk Pinnock lasted perhaps half of it. He was a small, frightened man who had been kept up too many nights in a shuttered room, and he looked once at Braithwell, whose face had gone the colour of tallow, and once at Cornelia, whose gentle sorrow had frozen upon her face like frost upon glass, and then he broke entirely, went down on the flags of the Duke's Hall and told the whole of it in a rush, weeping, how his lordship had brought him the specimen of the young lady's hand and stood over him while he copied it, how the letters were writ this week, both of them by his own pen, and how the lady in grey— He flung out a shaking arm at Cornelia, had come herself to Braithwell twice, and had paid him 10 guineas in her own gloved hand to make the copying good, and had told him, laughing, that a steward's brat put back in the gutter would learn not to climb where she was not wanted. The silence after was the deepest Tyrrell had ever heard in that hall, and he had heard 11 years of silence in it. Sir Marchmain rose slowly, and his grave face had gone to iron, and he looked at Braithwell and then at Cornelia Waplington with the particular cold attention of a magistrate who has been very nearly made an instrument, and does not forgive it. The portfolio of false letters had slid from Braithwell's slack arm and fanned upon the floor, and no one stooped to gather it. Cornelia stood among the whispering county with her dove-grey composure cracking across, and Tyrrell watched the thing she had built over 30 years come down about her in the space of a minute, watched the neighbours she had ruled by her wit and her diamonds turn their faces from her one by one, not in fury, which she might have borne, but in the small fastidious embarrassment with which the world withdraws from one it has decided to stop seeing. She tried even then. She lifted her chin and said something bright and brittle about a servant's lies and a clerk's terror, but her voice went out into a room that had stopped listening, orphaned, exactly as her wit had gone orphaned across the breakfast table a fortnight since, and this time there was no one at all to laugh. The sneer was silenced. It was silenced for good. Tyrrell should have felt triumph and felt none. Sir Marchmain was speaking of warrants now, of Braithwell, not of Amberley, of forgery and conspiracy and the diverted moneys, and the old steward by the hearth was weeping into his hands with relief, and the county was buzzing like an overturned hive, and it was all as it should be, the wrong turned back upon the wrong doors before witnesses. The innocent lifted, clear, and in the middle of it Tyrrell turned at last to the foot of the stair, with the whole of his cold heart risen up into his throat and one word in it, her name, and the foot of the stair was empty. The small corded trunk was gone. She was gone. He had been so intent upon the springing of the snare that he had not seen her go. Mrs. Denby was at his elbow before he had drawn breath to ask, grey and urgent, and said low, "She went out by the garden door, your grace, while the clerk was speaking, the moment your name was clear of it. She would not stay for the thanking. She has taken nothing but the one trunk, and she is walking in this cold, to catch the York coach at the Marholm crossroads at noon. And it wants but an hour of it." And the old woman looked at him with 30 years of Rushwick in her face, and said the boldest thing a servant had said to him in 11 years. "She heard you doubt her, sir. A woman does not stand to be thanked by the man who doubted her. If you want her you had best not send. You had best go't." He did not call for the carriage, which would take too long to put to. He did not answer Sir Marchmain, who was calling some coif to him. He did not so much as take his hat. He went out through the great doors and down the frozen steps 2 at a time, calling for his horse. For the grey he rode hard along the river of a bad morning, and while they brought it he stood in the white yard with his breath smoking and his heart going like a boy's, and understood at last, with the ice cracking clean through under him and the cold water of 11 years closing over his head, and not one particle of him afraid of it any longer, that he did not care in the least what she had been born, nor what the county said, nor what a wiser duke would do. He had let her walk up his stair with a borrowed candle and leave his heart standing wide awake, and then he had doubted her for 10 seconds in a gallery and driven her out into the snow. And there was only one thing on the whole cold earth he wanted now, and it was already a mile down the York road on foot with one small trunk, walking away from him with her back straight and her grey eyes forward and asking him for nothing, as she had asked him for nothing from the first. They brought the grey. Tyrrell was up before the boy had the second stirrup, and he turned the horse's head to the Marholm road and rode. and behind him the great house he had kept cold for 11 years stood open at every door, with its disgraced guests scattering to their carriages and its innocent old man weeping by a dead hearth, and none of it held him for a heartbeat. The frost was hard on the lane, and the grey's breath tore away in ribbons, and Tyrrell bent low over its neck and asked it for everything, past the frozen reeds and the grey water and the black hedges, counting the minutes to noon against the miles to Marholm. With the whole of a life he had thought safely buried sitting up alive and clamouring in his chest, and only one prayer in it, that a woman who had every reason on earth to keep walking would, for some mercy he had done nothing to deserve, look back down the road before the coach came. He took the gallery stairs 3 at a time, which no Duke of Rushwick had done since he was a boy in short coats, and he did not care who saw it, and there were a great many left in the hall below to see. Behind him the wreckage of Cornelia Waplington's triumph still smoked, the maid Bessie weeping into her apron and telling, at last, the whole of it, the jeweller's boy from Harnwick with his ledger open to the entry that damned her. The sapphire cross passing from hand to appalled hand, while Cornelia stood very white and very still in the centre of the floor with her schooled brightness fallen off her like a dropped shawl, and no one, not one soul in that county gathering, moving to stand beside her. He had waited 11 years to see that face stripped of its charm. He found, taking the stairs, that it gave him nothing at all. It was so much ash. The only face in the world he wanted was behind a closed door at the end of the passage, and he had put out the light in it himself, with his own 3 seconds of silence, and he did not know as he ran whether any power on earth could light it again. He reached her door and lifted his hand to it and stopped, his knuckles a breath from the wood, undone by the plainest thing, that he did not know how to knock upon it. He had commanded this house and half the shire for 11 years by never once being uncertain of his welcome. He was uncertain now to the marrow. He knocked. "I asked for an hour, Mr. Purley," came her voice through the panel, steady, unhurried, a woman folding her linen for a journey. "You may have your prisoner in 50 minutes. Not before." "It is not Purley," he said. The silence on the other side of the door was of a wholly different quality than the silence he had made in the hall. Hers was not a wound. It was a wall newly built, and well built, by a woman who had built such things before and knew how they were done. When she spoke again, the courtesy had gone out of her voice and something quieter and far harder had come into it. "Then it is worse," she said. "Go down, your grace. Your guests will want telling how to feel. You have always been the one they look to for that. Tyrian, open the door." "No." He set his palm flat against the wood as though he might reach through it. "There is no charge," he said. "There was never any charge but a lie, and the lie is broken downstairs before all of them, past any mending of hers. The jeweller's boy has the record of the sale. It was Cornelia bought the cross from a fence in Harnwick, and Cornelia bribed Bessie to lay it in your box, and Bessie has said so weeping in front of 40 people, and Purley has torn up his warrant, and it is over. You are cleared. You are wholly cleared. Do you hear me? No one will touch you." "I heard you," she said, from the 3rd stair. "I told you the county prefers the tidy verdict. It seems this time the tidy verdict and the true one are the same, and I am glad of it, chiefly for my father's sake." A pause. "You may consider yourself absolved of the inconvenience of my hanging. Good night. That is not why I came up. I know precisely why you came up." And now, at last, the wall cracked, and what came through was not tears but a low fury the more terrible for how level she kept it. "You came up because the danger has passed and the shame has changed its coat, and a man like you cannot abide an account left open. You did the sum in the hall and it came out against me, and now the ledger has been redrawn and it comes out for me, and you have run up your own stairs to settle it before it can trouble your sleep. But I was there, Tyrrell. I stood in that cold hall and I asked you one thing, to look at my face and know it, and you could not. Could not swiftly. Could not at all. I watched you weigh my word against a dead woman's ghost, and I watched the ghost win. That is not undone because a maid confessed. A jury of 40 cleared me tonight. You did not. You were the one bench in England whose verdict I wanted, and you returned it, and it cannot be appealed." He shut his eyes and leaned his brow against the door, and the truth of it went through him like cold iron, because there was no answer to it that was not simply yes. "You are right," he said. that she had not looked for, he heard the small startled arrest of her breath. "You are right in every particular," he said low to the wood, past all the guarding of his life. "I did weigh it. I stood in my own hall and I let a lie and a dead woman speak louder than your living face, and there is no accident in that and no excusing it. And I will not stand here and tell you the fault was Cornelia's or Bessie's or the county's, because the silence was mine, 3 seconds of it, and I would give the whole of this house to have them back, and I cannot, so I will not ask you to forgive it. A man does not ask to be forgiven the one thing that mattered as though it were a spilt cup. I ask only that you let me say the rest of it through a door you need not open, and then, if you bid me, I will go down and never trouble you again." The silence held, but she did not tell him to go. He took it, that not telling, as the last coin a beggar takes, and he spent it. 11 years ago, he said, "There was a woman I meant to marry. I will not name her. She is nothing now, less than nothing, and it is an insult to speak her in the same hour as you. She was clever and she was warm, and I believed every word she gave me, and she wanted the title and the Harnwick rents, and she took me for a green boy, which I was, and when a richer man offered, she went to him and left me a letter she thought very fine. I read it in this house, in that hall, at the foot of that stair, and I made myself a promise on the cold flags of it, that I would never again let my heart tell my head what was true, because my heart had proved a liar and a fool. I have kept that promise for 11 years. I kept it the night I stood over your father's ruined accounts, and forced your hand and told myself it was only a bargain, only an hair, only a matter I could understand, because a matter I could understand could not betray me. I built the whole of that cruelty out of one girl's letter, and I made you pay the reckoning of a debt you never ran up. And then tonight the old promise came due at the worst hour of my life, and it made me hesitate before the one face on earth I have never once had cause to doubt, and it cost me you. That is what I came up to say. Not that you are cleared. That I have been a coward for 11 years, and I did not know it until I saw the light go out of your face and understood that I had put it out to keep faith with a woman who was not worth the mending of your glove." He heard, on the other side of the door, a sound he could not name, not a sob, something smaller and more broken loose than that. "You never told me any of it," she said at last, and her voice had come nearer the wood. "No, I never told anyone. I told them I was cold. It is a great deal easier to be thought cold than to be known frightened." He drew a breath. "I am telling you." The bolt drew back. The door opened not wide, a hand's width, and then a little more. And she stood in it with the candle behind her, and her travelling box half filled upon the bed, and her eyes wet and unlowered, looking at him with all her walls down at last, and nothing raised in their place but the plain, unbearable question of whether she dared say the other thing. She said, "You have said what you did. You have not said the thing under it. I will not open this door on an apology, Tyrrell. An apology I could take from Pearlie. Say the thing you have been walking round for a month, or go down." And Tyrrell, Duke of Rushwick, who had never in his life said it to a living soul and had sworn he never would, went down instead upon one knee on the bare boards of a steward's daughter's borrowed room, in his ruined evening dress, before the open door, and looked up at her. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the night in the library, when you would not flatter me and would not fear me, and told me my roses were overpruned and dying of my management, and I went out and looked at them, and you were right. And I stood in the dark understanding that a woman had told me the truth to my face without wanting a thing from me for it, and I did not know what to do with a heart that had started again after 11 years of being glad it had stopped. I love you, and I was too much a coward to say it while it was safe, and now it is not safe at all. Now you have every reason on earth to shut this door in my face, and here it is anyway, because it is the only true thing I have, and I will not keep it back from you a moment longer. Whatever you do with it, I am not asking you to marry me to save your father. That debt I have already struck out tonight. Before witnesses, it is gone. Your family is safe of me forever, whatever your answer. I am not asking you to marry a duke. I am asking you, begging you I find, and I have never begged for anything, and I do not care, to marry a man who was a fool for 11 years and stopped being one 3 seconds too late, and who will spend every year he has left proving to you that he learned it. Marry me because you want me. There is no other reason left in the world for you to do it, That is the only reason I want." She looked down at him a long moment, and the tears stood on her lashes and did not fall, and when she spoke her voice had gone soft as he had never heard it, all the level courtroom hardness gone out of it. "Get up," she said. "Not until you answer. Get up, you impossible man. I cannot say yes to a duke kneeling on my floorboards. It is not decent. Someone will come." And there it was, the yes, wrapped in a scolding, the way she gave everything true, sideways and dry and without a single ornament. And he was on his feet and had her hands in both of his before she had finished saying it, and she was laughing and weeping at once, and he brought her hands up and pressed his mouth to her cold knuckles and held them there against his face, as though they were the only warm thing in a long winter. Which they were. "Say it plainly," he said against her fingers. "Once, I have earned to hear it plainly." "Yes," she said, "I want you. Not the house, not the rents, not the sapphires. I would have taken you in your shirt in a debtor's cell, and been the richer for it, and that is the whole trouble with you, Terrell. You have never once believed anyone could. Believe it now. I am marrying the man. I have never wanted the rank a day in my life, and I want the man so much it has been a positive inconvenience to me." She freed one hand and laid it very lightly along his jaw, where 11 years of winter had frozen, and he turned his face into her palm and shut his eyes. "There," she said, more gently. "You may stop being frightened now. You are permitted. I have you." They were married 3 weeks later, and he did not do it quietly, which surprised the county, who had expected a hushed affair got over before the scandal cooled. He did the opposite. He married her in the great church at Harnwick, with every family of the shire commanded to attend, commanded, in the old ducal way he had used all his life, to keep people at a distance, and used now, once, to do the plainest possible thing in the plainest possible sight. Tyrian came up the aisle in silver grey, her father on her arm, old Mr. Ambry, upright and weeping, mended in health by the mere fact of her, and about her throat, at the Duke's own asking, lay the sapphire cross that had been his mother's. The very cross that had been made an instrument to ruin her, given back now openly to the only woman he had ever thought worthy to wear it, so that all the shire might see exactly whose it was, and exactly who had failed to steal her good name with it. Cornelia Waplington was not in the church. She had gone to a cousin in the north within the week, and no invitation had followed her, and the county, which had laughed at all her cruelties for a season, found within a month that it could no longer quite remember having liked her. The world is that way with the fallen. And Terrell spared her not one further thought, which was the completest ruin he could have visited upon a woman who had lived on being thought of. His cousin Alden stood up with him and wept more than the bride's father, and clapped him on the shoulder in the vestry afterward, and said only, "You near enough threw it in the fire, you great cold fool." And Terrell said, "I know it," with such humility that Alden could think of nothing else to rag him with, and gave it up and embraced him instead. They came home to Rushwick in the long gold of an April evening, and he handed her down from the carriage himself, and did not let the footman near it, and they stood a moment on the gravel before the house that had been so cold for so long, and she looked up at its many dark windows and said, "It wants warming, this place." And he said, "It has wanted it 11 years. You are the first fire it has had," and led her in. He kept his promise, the new one, and broke the old one every day for the rest of his life. He learned to say the thing under the thing. She taught him patiently, as she might have taught a bright child a difficult hand, and he proved apt at in the end, though it was slow going at the first. He mended the roses under her supervision, and they came back the following June in such extravagance that people stopped their carriages on the Harnwick road to look. When their daughter was born the next spring, the hair the whole cruel bargain had been raised upon, arrived now for no reason on earth but love. He sat up the whole of the night on the wrong side of a closed door for the second time in his life, and this time when it opened it was to a nurse's smile, and he went in and found his wife pale and triumphant with the child at her breast. And he knelt down by the bed exactly as he had knelt on her borrowed floorboards a year before, and put his head down beside them both, and did not trouble to be a duke about any of it. Years on, when he was an old man and she was going grey, and the county had long since decided that the Duke of Rushwick had always been, whatever they had once said, a warm sort of man and rather doted upon his duchess. Someone at a dinner asked him idly how the two of them had come to make such a match of it, so plainly happy after so unpromising a start. He was quiet a moment. Then he found her down the length of the table with his eyes, as he had been finding her across rooms for 30 years, and she looked up as she always somehow knew to, and something passed between them that no one else at the table was let into. I gave her an ultimatum once, he said. Cold as you like, marry me or face ruin. He turned his glass slowly by the stem, and then I spent the rest of my life discovering it was I who had been ruined all along, and only she could mend it, and that she had said yes at last for the one reason I had never dared hope for, that she wanted the man, and had never for a moment wanted anything else. He lifted the glass a little, toward the far end of the table, toward the woman everyone in that county had once overlooked and no one ever would again. I recommend it to you all, he said, being loved for nothing you own. There is no fortune to touch it. I was a great while learning so, but I learned.